Hi everyone, I'm going to show you how to get the most out of Blake's Commercial Masters method mix. So just like our green betaine, you've got to be really careful with the water you add. Little and often is definitely the way. So pour a bit of me method mix into my bucket, exactly the same as our green betaine, a little bit at a time. So just try and get it nice and damp with your first mix as such. So again, a little bit more water, never any rush with these mixes. So just get it to the point where when you're moving it around in your bucket, it's like so. You can see immediately it's starting to bind. Now, I know from experience, take a tiny bit more, so not a lot more. Just want to mix it so that it's sort of, I'd say 90% there. So that's sort of perfect now, I feel. So what we're going to do is, and just pop this through a riddle. So, pop my Groundbait through my riddle. You'll be able to see it just flies through. Now the nice thing about having these mixes really dry, like so that there, mix the required amount of Groundbait up, and I take that behind me onto my peg, literally like that. Now the biggest thing I think nowadays, everyone's trying to make the perfect mix at the start and then just sort of fish like that all day. Now when you're method feeder fishing, it doesn't always work like that. I've had it so many times in the past where I'm using a nice dry mix and I've got sort of a little bait box full of water on my side tray, and I mould my feeder up and drop it in and think, oh yeah, that breaks down absolutely lovely. And then I've got another mix where I mix it and think, oh, I might have overcooked it a little bit. You know, it's sort of binding, it's not breaking down. Put it in the water and I'm looking at it thinking, that's definitely not the one. Only to cast out with my dry mix and get an odd little sign, the rod doesn't go round. To try my damper mix, the mix that I felt like I'd ruined, chuck it out, and it's like, so this is one thing when you're actually fishing, what I'm a massive believer of is playing around with it. That's why with the green betaine and my method mix, I just mix it nice and dry to start with, and then when I'm fishing I can tinker around with it. So Blue Peter style, here's my mix earlier, you'll be able to see it's nice and dry, and if I pop that in water it's just going to open up immediately. Now sometimes that can be quite good when you're sort of starting your match, because you're chucking out, you want to be chucking quite regular, knowing that all your bait's breaking up. But when you're fishing, play around with it. You know, when you're out in the sun as well, you can, the amount of times I've had it where I've started off and I'm catching a few and then all of a sudden I stop getting bites. And it's because my Groundbait is breaking up too quickly. Just dampen it off slightly with my fingers, start chucking it in, all of a sudden I'm catching again. So be, you know, experimenting. Don't think, well, I've got my mix, you know, before the start of the match and I'm just going to fish like that. So again, just like our green betaine, I'm going to take out my amount of Groundbait that I want, and I'll always leave most of it in my Groundbait bowl. And then with my tub of water, what I can do is again just dip my fingers and just swirl it around if I want to dampen it up slightly. Same again, dip my fingers, and just by doing this you can just get it to the required consistency when you're fishing. Now another little trick, what I like to do, so once I've got me, you know, my Groundbait, that's just my neat Groundbait. Another thing that I like to do is just have a bit of Groundbait in a separate tub. So I've got sort of my neat Groundbait one, I've got a separate tub with a bit of Groundbait, and then just by adding a few dry micro pellets, not soaked micro pellets, and the same thing, this time I can just add a little bit more water. And the nice thing with feeding with your dry micros, and what I think can work really well, is you can have a mix that is quite stiff when you put it on the feeder. So when you're using soaked micro pellets, you've got to get them bang on, because when you chuck out one, it's got to withstand the force of the cast. Sometimes you're chucking a long way, the force of the impact on the water to be able to get down to the bottom. And you can be messing around with your micro pellets and they sort of bind, but they're forever trying to open up even when you're going out to cast. So when they hit the water, a lot of your bait's coming off your feeder. But by having sort of a nice sticky ground bait that binds really well, like that, it's, you know, properly binding. But by adding dry micro pellets, I can speed up the breakdown of my ground bait when it's on my feeder. And there is no rule. I use like 100mm ground bait, 100mm micro pellets, or 200mm ground bait, 100mm micro pellets. I don't work like that, to be honest. I just have my different mixes, my neat ground bait, my neat micros, and then some ground bait and some micros mixed. And I mess around with it on the day. Try to get it out of your head that you want a fixed amount, and just, you know, feel free to experiment. And that's probably the biggest tip I would give you when it comes to using your method feeder ground bait, is feel free to play around with it. I think that's really, really important. One thing that we done when we made this mix is making it so that you can use it as neat ground bait, and you can mix it dry, and you know that your ground bait's going to open up really, really quickly. But I wanted the same mix that I could just slightly dampen off and almost create a mix that doesn't even break down. Because sometimes, I was saying before, believe it or not, you look at it and think, you chuck it in the water, and to us, we think, nah, that ain't right. And you chuck out, and you sat there, and all of a sudden the rod's getting dragged in. Even at times, you're chucking out, you're holding the line to sink your line, and it's dragging it in, and you think, well, how did it even get that off? It's like concrete on the feeder. And I think that's really, really important when you're fishing with a method feeder, is having the option to make it so the fish, or what we think, they're really, really going to struggle to get, you know, the bait off the frame. I think a lot of mixes, they just open up too quickly. So just experiment with it, that's what I will say. And lastly, the one difference between this mix and the green betaine one is it's ever such a slightly nicer colour. The green betaine's a lovely colour, it's nice and dark, perfect for your skimmers, you know, and carp fishing in the winter time. But this mix is lovely, you know, all throughout the warmer months. That slightly lighter colour, just perfect. You know, it's not too bright, it's not too dark, not too light. It just seems the perfect colour. We've spent a lot of time getting this mix bang on. But just remember that little trick as well with your dry micro pellets. If you made a nice stiff mix, just by adding a few dry micro pellets, you'd be amazed at how many you can add. And you can use your dry micro pellets to speed up the breakdown. We all know how much carp like eating pellets, skimmers like eating pellets, so it makes sense to add them into it. And also, by giving them hard pellets on your feeder, it's just something a little bit different than what they probably see week in, week out.